Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very, very special edition of the Product Management Learning Series. My name is Shivi. I am a product lead at LinkedIn and host for today's show. Please drop in the chat where you're joining us from. Thanks again, and welcome to the show. So as many of you know, that the Product Management Learning Series is a series of live streaming events where industry thought leaders and product practitioners share their PM career journey and lessons learned along the way to inspire current and aspiring product builders like you to level up your product career. We're starting a very, very special series featuring product builders and thought leaders from leading companies working on generative AI technologies. Please join us to explore the challenges and opportunities from this very transformative technology paradigm shift and gain insights from those leading the charge in generative AI development. So make sure you subscribe to the newsletter, which you can find a link in the event details tab to receive recaps of today's takeaways from today's events, as well as future event updates. Now, with that, let me bring up and introduce you to our very, very special guest for today's edition, Barak Turovsky. Thank you so much, Barak, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Shivi, for inviting me. I'm very excited to share my journey and my experience and my insights from these product managers from different companies and different stages of my career. So thanks so much for having me on this.
No, it's a real honor to work with Barak. For those who don't know him, Barak used to be the head of languages AI product teams at Google for almost a decade, and he was actually the one who works on large language model before it becomes the hottest thing on earth, right? So we're really, really honored to have you here today. And obviously, you had a lot of experience being the chief product officers, leading engineering, product, and AI teams of various startups, as well as companies like the Microsoft, PayPal, SAP, and you're currently the executive in residence at Scale Venture Partners. So really, really excited to have you here today. Thank you again.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Now, without further ado, let's dive in. So, Barak, as we mentioned, you were the head of languages AI at product team at Google for almost a decade. You went through some of the most exciting times from its early inception to now becoming, the most talk about, the hottest thing, that people want to learn more about, right? So tell us more about the evolution of AI and the profound impacts you have witnessed in your own words.
Yeah, so I'm consider myself both very extremely lucky that I actually was in two waves of AI. I call the current wave the second coming of AI. And the reason for that, as you said, is that I worked on what we now call large language models since 2015, 2016. I used to joke semi-cynically that I worked on those esoteric things called large language models long before they became the hottest things on earth, as you say. But on a more serious note, it's actually true that in the first coming of AI, that actually started with one of the products that I led, Google Translate, which I'm extremely proud of. That was the first product ever that used what we now call large language models, so deep neural networks at scale. That was 2015, 2016. And by the way, the side note, I think I will share a link. It's a very good article from 2016 called The Great AI Awakening from New York Times, who actually explains the history of AI and the progress that was made at that time using Google Translate, the first product, as an example. But back to my point is that the first wave of AI was that Google Translate and other companies proved that you could run deep neural networks, you could run large language models at scale on a huge training data corpus. And then obviously multiple other papers like Transformer paper, etc., that many of them came from Google, that deserves a lot of credit for all those things. But the truth of, there was a little bit of hype, but very quickly this hype subsided in 2016, 2017. And it was pretty obvious that most of the AI innovation at that time was very confined to super advanced big tech companies like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, etc. And Google had amazing progress across, I personally worked on better understanding search queries, how to better match queries to keywords. And that resulted in an amazing impact for Google, but it was very, very much confined. Now, to some extent, some of it is also, OpenAI deserves credit, mostly I would say on AI side, AI, sorry, UI side, on the user experience, or user interface side, because they to some extent popularized and democratized the perception what large models can do. And now obviously many more use cases, many more companies could use it. And that's why I believe we are still very early, and I think we should discuss it. We are literally just scratching the surface, but it's definitely now people understand at scale enormous potential of large language models, and it will be basically spread out, and it will be democratized across many companies, large and small, not only confined to big tech.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting, especially with ChatGPT, with 5 days getting to 1 million users. It's like definitely one of the most popular app. And it's just so simple, right? Everybody can try it. I remember the first time when I, early last year, back in September, I got an opportunity to play with the playground because LinkedIn's part of Microsoft. And I remember my manager asked me, hey, just try to prompt it. I was like, what do you mean by prompting? I can just ask a question and he will just work. So I remember. So it's a great segue for our next question, because like you said, you believe we're still in the early stage of AI, even though it sort of have this magical moment, this hype, like since late last year, November, when OpenAI released the ChatGPT. So what do you think it's needed for AI at scale?
Yeah, I think we are now on a stage that I call it maybe playground or maybe demos. By the way, I'm now in venture capital and I see it very vividly. People come and get money just for a demo. They don't fully understand the use case. They don't fully even test the use case. But the beauty of this approach that now it's extremely easy and relatively cheap to try it and to demo it and to play with it. But it's much harder to actually scale. As you probably know, everything in life has more or less a Pareto principle that 80% of efforts going on 20%, to productize 20%, the remaining 20%, and it's totally true here. But if you kind of abstract on a high level, there are three main components that are needed to do AI at scale, plus there could be the component that actually could create some kind of value creation or competitive advantage. The first one is training data. The second one is AI models, and the third one is compute resources. I currently believe that even though there is a lot of back and forth, I believe that both training data and AI models are effectively commoditized. And I will expand on that. Let's start with the easiest one. AI models are definitely commoditized. There are a ton of companies, many of them obviously started from focus on Google, but not only, like Meta, Llama did not come from Google. This research is published. Some of this research is open source. That definitely nobody has. It's hard to do, but it's not like atomic bombs that only few select companies closely guard can do it. It's definitely commoditized, right? And it will continue to be commoditized. The training data, I believe, unless it's a very esoteric use case, a use case where you have regulatory restrictions, maybe healthcare, maybe national security, but more or less the data is available. Now, yes, we are starting to get all this copyright, etc., and it will need to be regulated what you can crawl. But at the end of the day, it's not completely new thing. Google was crawling the internet, and there was there's definitely those definition of Creative Commons and common domain, etc. I believe that if it's not commoditized today, most of the data for generic use cases will be commoditized. It will not be a sustainable competitive advantage. Maybe Google will have some advantage because of their sheer power of crawling the internet, because if you're not crawled, you more or less do not exist. They'll have some advantage, but there are some other big companies that can do it, and small companies like OpenAI was a small company when they did it. So I believe on that front, we are also going towards commoditization. The biggest thing that I think it's a big, and we see it right now as a huge inhibiting factor is compute. Compute is such a precious resource. If you want to do it at scale, you need specific type of GPUs or customized TPUs at Google or customized hardware. There is not enough of them. There is amazing demand. Some companies, some governments are buying capacity to prevent competitors to get it, or because they believe something will happen on a political level. So I think we are in a situation for the next 3 to 5 years that compute will be not only but also scarce resource. And that probably means that to do it at scale, you probably need to work through cloud providers. So in that regard, if you look at value creation right now, most of it is right now, believe it or not, is more on the infrastructure side. On a low level, it's NVIDIA and GPU providers. On a higher level, it's the cloud providers. And we, I believe, just scratching the surface on application layer, which we product managers are probably mostly interested, because a lot of this is right now trial and error, a lot of this is demoing, a lot of this is playing, right? But there's definitely very interesting use cases that will emerge.
Yeah, we'll dive into some of the use cases in just a moment. I just want to double click on some of the points as you mentioned about.
Yep.
So it's very interesting that you said like the models are going to be commoditized. Training data in many ways could be commoditized. A lot of people are also talking about if you have like proprietary data, you can build that into a moat. Do you think that is a sustainable moat, or is it going to be commoditized as well?
I think it's a very tricky question. So first of all, just to clarify, I believe AI models are commoditized today. So that's to me like a done deal to a large extent, right? On training data, the question is, you might have depends on the use case. Let's take a use case of customer service. Customer service for a specific industry, let's say banking, okay? I would argue there is a ton of data today, Creative Commons, of a language that might be related to banking. So if there's no data or very little data related to this particular area, you could say, oh, then I have something that my proprietary model will be way better than a huge model from, let's say, OpenAI. But OpenAI relatively quickly, ChatGPT-4 demonstrated what happens when a model provider decides to go deep into some particular area. For example, OpenAI decided to go into what I call standardized tests in a legal domain. They were like on top 25 percentile on passing bar exam. They invested in it. Yes, maybe some through partnerships, maybe some through data, common domain data, but they immediately improved. And let's face it, in many areas like legal, sounds like, oh, everything is, but a ton of stuff is public, right? You can find a lot of those things public. And two, you also need to ask yourself, is it really that important, customer service interactions? What's the main value? Is the main value is lingo of this industry? And is it like not available? I can give you a ton of examples. I don't know, credit card applications. I mean, if you're interested in the space, you can go and find a ton of people that write about, blog about it, etc., and it's all on the internet. So I believe unless it's really like regulatory, you cannot find this data, or this data is super valuable, and before that the model will not work. I believe most of the use cases you will not have a competitive advantage through what is called proprietary data.
Yeah, that's good to know. I also read about people thinking that there's going to be a base model and then also like a commoditized model for based on industry domain as well.
It could be, but we don't know yet. Yeah, we don't know to what extent custom model will be better than generic model. In some use cases, yes, and some use cases, no. And that's where, as I said, we are so early. And that's why it's so exciting to actually play with it and figure that out.
Yeah, we'll dive into the use cases very soon. But one additional question I want to ask you is that you mentioned language model have been commoditized, and it's actually good for greater human goods because now there's so many companies and use cases can use it. But there's so many out there too, though. How do you? One of the hottest questions I think right now is how do you choose which model to use, and open source or API? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so it's basically just to rephrase the question, is it open source or proprietary, right? It's a great question. And I think you need to look at this across three dimensions. The first dimensions that I believe is the most important is cost. Those models are costly. And yes, company like OpenAI invested a lot of effort and money, insane amount of money to train, but they now need to recoup it. And obviously Microsoft, who exposes it, doesn't work for free either. So if you want to do it at scale, to try it, it's very easy. The moment you want to build it at scale, like for a scalable use case, it's expensive. So then basically people start making this consideration. And by the way, those all things back to my point about working on this for a long time, there are examples that we did exactly the same thing we were at Google when we launched our first very small large language models. Let's call it this way, because the name large language models, it's very deceiving. Those are humongous language models, right? So like in our case, we launched the model in 2016, was like, I don't know, 10 billion parameters. Now it's small. At that time, we had performance problem, meaning our model was, to serve it, what's called inference, was 100x slower than production. And we actually had to do a lot of things. One is only, at that time, probably Google could do, which is basically invest custom hardware to accelerate it. But we also started to do what we call distillation, which is you artificially shrink the model, and then you literally build a graph how much shrinking the model loses in terms of quality, translation quality. And I'm just using made-up number. You could discover that 30% reduction in model size, which reduces cost and improves performance, give you 5-8% reduction in quality, and maybe then you do some fine tuning, etc. You're getting to comparable or slightly less good quality, and that's a good trade-off. So I think a lot of people start playing with that, and in that regard, custom models, more customization model will be important. The second important component to many industries is what I call control. And my extreme example of control is actually articles that people, if they subscribe to my LinkedIn, can read about impact of generative AI on entertainment industry, because entertainment industry, it's all about proprietary, copyright, etc. They're always the first, for good, they're always first to adopt any shiny new things, but also first to sue anyone who is kind of violating their proprietary. So I believe for them, control will be very important. In my article, I believe that the most likely scenario right now that they will actually partner with someone, give them all their proprietary training data, create custom models specific for their domain, let's say entertainment, and probably will sue anyone else who is like, oh, you're violating my IP. So that's kind of extreme example where control is important, meaning industry X, let's say entertainment industry, doesn't want to give a lot of control to big tech companies. They want to take most of the economic benefit to themselves. And finally, the last one is what I call, you can call it domain adaptation, you can call it domain-specific quality. Maybe there's two use cases, I believe. One use case more on a higher end. ChatGPT model, as an example, that like a golden standard is not good enough for a domain, for specific domain. We need to fine tune to make it way better. But as I mentioned, I think we'll see a lot of use cases that actually combination of cost and quality. Back to my example in Google Translate, I want to shrink the model because it's too costly, and I want to fine tune it with my specific domain data to get to some acceptable level of quality. And by the way, I think it probably should lead to the use cases and kind of to some extent my framework, because I think the question is, what is the quality threshold for a use case? That's the most fascinating question, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that, Barak, I actually get to know you from your LinkedIn article, from the beautiful charts that you create, the mental framework. And I think also, I mean, today's talk is about beyond the hype, right? Like the real impact of generative AI use cases. So without further ado, let us know, like, how should we be thinking about all the different superpowers that generative AI have existed, but how to put a structure in place to say what is more mature now for value creation, and then what is still, subjective to like risk of hallucination and all this other stuff. So yeah, tell us more.
Yeah, great question. So for context, I literally in November, December last year, I was literally bombarded by questions from investors, big and small, institutional, public, private, etc. How we should look at this, how we should evaluate it, etc. As I said, that's what I created the cynical thing. Yes, I know much more about it than average people because I worked for it for many years. So basically, a lot of this is kind of a combination of my discussions with multiple folks, both on enterprise side and investment side. So let me share my screen. Let me know if you see it well.
Yes, it's showing up.
Okay, so I hope now it's actually, I do believe it's still a misconception, but I think it's being cleared out a little bit. But the biggest misconception, I believe, on what ChatGPT suddenly made people realize that computer or machines could be highly fluent. And what I mean by fluent are very polished, can speak like a human, maybe very eloquent human. That was kind of amazing for many people. To me, it was kind of, 6-7 years of this, but it's still pretty amazing. It's amazing technological achievement. What people forget, though, that being very fluent does not mean being very accurate. In fact, it's two different dimensions. You could be extremely fluent, extremely charismatic, extremely polished, extremely eloquent, and speak with high degree of confidence, but you could be very inaccurate. And just to give you a relatively funny analogy of human behavior, it's basically a human behavior of someone who is extremely confident, extremely polished in they can talk about any topic in the world. The moment they're being asked a question they don't know the answer, they literally make stuff up on the spot. But because their delivery is so good, people tend to be carried away by their delivery, not by their accuracy. And that's obviously a very dangerous outcome, because regardless of the intent. The intent could be con artists. That's why con artists are so successful, because in topics that people don't understand, they speak so confidently and fluently and charismatically that people tend to believe them. But it could be, you have a lot of successful entrepreneurs that are in what was called about Steve Jobs, reality distortion field. They just believe in their own stuff. Whether it's true or not, it doesn't matter. Therefore, I believe it's really critical to evaluate any use case that you take and try to understand what's more important. Is it on those two dimensions, high fluency versus low fluency, high accuracy, low accuracy? And just to give it some, I would call somewhat extreme examples, let's look on the left side, those green bubbles, and I will expand on the colors in a second. But let's say, I mentioned entertainment industry, let's say you want to compose music, you want to write a children's book, you want to write some kind of a greeting for a school teacher, you want to write a poem, you want to write a science fiction, or even create stock images for marketing or write a review. But you really needed a good story. In some extreme use cases, like, writing children's book or writing science fiction, you might not even need accuracy. In some use cases, you need accuracy, but the most important thing is a good story. Now, if you look at on the bottom right side, for example, those red bubbles, you see things like supporting data for important business decisions. Let's say I'm asking ChatGPT, what is the earning growth of, eBay in the last 10 years? Or I want to buy an appliance and I'm asking, what's the best dishwasher should I buy? Or I want to book travel and I'm asking, what's the best hotel in Paris should I buy? In those questions, the most important thing for sure is high accuracy. Yes, in some of them, for example, for travel, you need a story, you need an explanation. But if this explanation will come on expense of accuracy, it's kind of useless. So that's, to me, the most important distinction. Now, the third kind of dimension related to how to do it at scale is what I do with colors. And colors means how low or high stakes the use cases are. And just to let's take a bit more down to earth example. Let's say you want to write a business memo or email, or you want to create a business presentation. Those use cases, the stakes are pretty high, but the beauty of it is that the user, unless he's very dumb, he will probably not he will not blindly send the presentation or email. He will check it for accuracy. And then the division of work between machine and human would be, you machine, please help me with fluency. Because for many people, let's face it, eloquent writing takes a lot of time and effort. Many people are good with facts in their domain, but they're not very good to create a good story. So if machine does that, that could save 50 to 70% productivity increase for those users, and they'll probably be okay to double check for accuracy and maybe even adjust for accuracy, because productivity improvement is very big. Their value is not only accuracy, their value is eloquent writing, good story, good presentation, good visuals, etc. Now, let's look at an example at scale. By the way, when I mean at scale, you're talking about millions of business presentations, billions of, let's say, queries to ask about earnings growth of eBay. If you look at this use case, supporting that for business decision, it's probably the closest you can get to, let's say, Google search. It's literally practically impossible to put a person to validate every search result. If you want the user to validate every search result, that's not that different than what we're doing today in Google search, right? You basically get links and you validate them. And that's why I believe it's really important to look at this use case in this kind of framework that many people found very useful. Just to go and kind of observe some interesting trends, like where do you want to focus? Classical 101 of PMing is prioritization. What I observed when I started to do the framework is that those kind of clouds here, the blue cloud that I call creator workplace productivity use cases, those use cases is what I mentioned, writing memos, right, creating children's book, creating composing music, etc. Those use cases are much better fit, at least in the short to medium term, to large language models than use case that I call them here the reddish cloud, It's what I call information/decision support use case. Those are kind of the closest equivalent is like Google search. Because the stakes here are high, the value creation is that give me the right answer, maybe one answer. That's very hard to do, given hallucinations and other challenges of large language models. On the flip side, as I said, in this bucket, in some places where it's the easiest to start, you don't really have objectively one right answer. There are multiple answers that are maybe even subjective. But even if there is one answer, like in those use cases, the value is create a good story, and users will probably be okay and more tolerant, frankly, to mistakes or hallucinations of ChatGPT, because the value axis, the value creation is not only accuracy, the value creation is actually much more fluency. Let me stop there. If you have any questions or anything I could clarify on this framework.
No, absolutely. I love this framework. It puts structure into potentially a very messy problem, right? And I love that you highlighted, hey, number one skills for product manager is how to prioritize. Maybe I'll argue number two skill, if I wanted to ask you as a follow-up question, is the notion around, I guess, differentiation. So one of the hottest debate, I believe, in the venture capital world today is around how should startup play versus big incumbents, right? Because on one hand, I think startups move a lot faster, but how do they balance like the readiness of the technology and that the fact that they need to prove maybe commercial value and make money? And then on the other stream, people are like, well, big company have the distribution, right? Like Microsoft, Google already adding a bunch of Gen AI features into Copilot and the upcoming like Google, Apple, Meta, flow. So what is the interplay between the bigger companies and the smaller company, and how should they think about making money or serving the user better with this technology?
Great question. So I believe, that's not my idea. It's an idea of Ben Thompson from Stratechery blog, who is very good blogger about technology. He made a comment that I generally agree. There are two types of technological innovations. The first one is disruptive innovation that basically creates new things that were not possible before, completely new use cases. And by the way, they usually disrupt incumbents. If you take an example of PC that created, all this revolution, knowledge worker revolution we have now, disrupted IBM, then you might look at internet that maybe disrupted Microsoft to some extent, created social networks, maybe created e-commerce and Google. Then you look at mobiles that created social networks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those technologies are making new use cases that didn't exist or couldn't exist before. So another technological innovation that is more sustaining innovation, meaning it makes existing use cases way better than before. And his assertion, which I agree with, that currently AI looks like it's much more sustaining innovation, meaning it makes use cases like productivity software, like Office, better. It might look cloud applications better. It might take customer service applications, make them much better. If that's the case, if it's true, it's obviously benefits the incumbents much more. So Google will benefit on the search side, Microsoft will benefit on Office side and on coding side, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of my predictions that definitely companies that already have the use cases that can make much better will benefit from all the things that you mentioned. That said, I do believe there's always, in those technological innovations, are always place for startups, because many companies, not everybody is Microsoft and not everybody is Google. And we will talk about some specific use cases that I believe will disrupt existing players, but not technological disruption, business disruption. But I would encourage people to think that most likely, unfortunately, the competitive mode, what VCs like to say, is not AI per se. It's much less AI, it's more classical, either consumer, create a good application for consumer, or create good application infrastructure for enterprises. And then it's basically classical. I'm in enterprise VC, I will use enterprise as an example. There are multiple values of competitive mode. One could be you really understand the use case well. Two, you execute well. You build great software. You hire the teams that know how to sell to enterprise. That's more classical value creation axis. Most likely, back to my point, unless you're Google or NVIDIA, most of the modes are not AI modes per se.
Yeah, I think the TLDR that I take away from our conversation and my reading so far is that AI is an enabler that allows us to solve a problem better. But the rules of the game hasn't changed that much, right? You still
Yep.
need to do the hard work to be able to build the
Yep.
moats and the defensibility. I think before we transition to maybe talk about vision for large language model, do you have anything else regarding use cases that are most practical to implement, to think about
Yeah.
from a time horizon standpoint?
Yes. So again, back to my point. If you use the framework that I mentioned, there are several use cases that I believe are kind of a sweet spot of sizable user adoption or monetization potential, and also practical implementation, at least in short to medium terms. I will give a couple of examples. The first example I gave is entertainment. I mean, it's probably less applicable to many of us, but there is many of us that might be working in Warner Music that has a bunch of Google people and other companies. As I mentioned, I believe they will go into the approach of custom models and suing everyone else. That's the nature of entertainment. That's how they work. Then the next one, it's more a bucket of use cases, what I call customer-facing interactions. I believe that LLMs will greatly improve productivity and especially customer experience and customer satisfaction of what I call customer-facing interactions. That's like customer support, sales, marketing, through any channels, emails, chat, even calls. If you look at an example of Google Duplex, you can do very naturally human-sounding conversations. And that will go across more or less every vertical. And on this front, people usually react well to either greed or fear. So I will use a little bit of a fear tactic here. But I really believe in it. I believe that any company that has sizable customer base, I don't know, 500,000, 1 million customers that they interact frequently, will have in the next 3 years connect their internal knowledge sources and internal information sources to large language models and serve them through large language models. If they do that, they'll probably have pretty significant advantage on productivity and customer service, customer satisfaction. If they don't, they will be in a very big danger of being disrupted, either by their existing competitors or maybe newcomers, like startups that could basically create a sweet spot of delivering way better customer satisfaction in a fraction of a cost. I'm just making it up. Maybe 50% reduction in cost. That's very hard to compete if you're late to the game. So that's huge, in my opinion, one of the biggest opportunities and challenges, or like risks for existing companies. The next one, I believe, it's coding software development, right? There is multiple early studies. To some extent, it's a pseudo language that is easier actually to do because it's a structured language compared to real human languages that evolved over thousands of years, and they're less structured. They have rules and exceptions to the rules and exceptions to exceptions, so it's very hard to do. And finally, the last one, I believe it's already being disrupted, is everything related to education or education certification. It's already ChatGPT already showed that it could pass nursing, low bar, and other exams. So I think it will unleash to a large extent new era of innovation, how to use AI to make teaching and certification exams easier and more impactful. And also maybe how we learn necessary skills for this rapidly changing workplace of the future.
Yeah, I already see some of that happening throughout the education tech company, given that I also work on like learning products and jobs products for LinkedIn. I really, really enjoy our conversation. Good times always pass really fast. So we're almost coming up on time. But before we leave, I wanted to leave with two other big questions. So Barak, you started in the early days, like the inceptions before most people know what large language model is. But as you envision into the future, what do you anticipate is the next leap for LLMs? Is AGI coming soon? Like, what gets you most excited?
Yes. So first of all, maybe I'm a very practical person. This topic of customer-facing interaction is a very exciting topic. There are still a lot of things to figure out. To what extent, one thing that people need to realize, it's not the next outsourcing wave that I can fire a bunch of expensive people in the US and hire a bunch of people in Philippines or India. You need to reorganize the complete process. You replace this human, not with cheaper humans. You replace it with machines. And actually, it's more augmenting than replacing. You need different skills, you need different tools. And I think it's a very complex topic that will take time. So that, by the way, it's exciting more on a practical level. I might disappoint you that I'm less, and there's multiple colleagues that are very respected and much more knowledgeable than me in AI that believe that AGI is close. I actually believe it's relatively far away. I don't know, 50 years. I still believe that, and I can give multiple examples of computers are still pretty dumb. And the reason they're dumb is that they're very focused on the task at hand. For example, ChatGPT sounds very intelligent, but the task is to create an answer. And the answer might make sense, might not make sense. To me, some maybe, good analogy is imagine yourself, we just don't see this behavior in humans. Imagine yourself a human that speaks as an adult, very eloquent adult, but has a consciousness of 5 or 7 year old, does not understand what's good, what's bad, what's right or wrong. That to some extent an analogy that I use, and that's still to trust machines to make actions. I think we're very far away from that. That's why I believe we should start at least for next 3 to 5 years and more drafts, more augmenting, more helping humans to do their task more effectively. So that's kind of my view. It might be a bit down to earth and practical, and maybe it's simply because I, many years of PM work, and I want to be kind of down to earth, just the facts, ma'am. But that's kind of my prediction.
No. Yeah, definitely. We like to hear different spectrum, right? You have the more pragmatic folks and then the more optimistic folks. So with that, we're almost coming on time. So I just wanted to ask probably one of the $1 million questions for a lot of the listeners in today's program and reading our newsletter. What advice would you give? I guess it's two level, both to product builders working on product, looking to maybe should they join the AI industry? How do they get that skill set? And then also at a personal level, is AI going to replace all of us eventually? How should they think about career development in this AI era?
Great question. As I said, I believe in general, it's true for technology, it's true for AI. Technology is augmentation and helping human skills. I really like the quote from Steve Jobs, who said, if you measure how fast different animals run, humans are kind of, in the middle, below average. They're definitely faster than a turtle, but they're much slower than a cheetah or than a bird. However, human created tools, bicycle, car, plane, that makes them much faster. So that's to me a great example of you augment human skills, and in this augmentation, I believe over, as I say, longer period of time, it creates new jobs. It creates much more wealth creation. A lot of the wealth creation that we have today that was unthinkable before Industrial Revolution was created because of those tools. That said, that's much more societal problem. It's a long-term view. In the short term, there'll be transition of skills, and some skills will be less important or less applicable, but new skills needs to be developed. So I believe that product management is one of the verticals that I believe people need to be very adaptable and look at things and understand that technology changes fast. I would encourage people to stop looking at things from AI angle. Back to my point that a lot of the modes, a lot of the value creation is not AI, it's deep understanding of the use case and how AI could actually help that use case, as opposed to, let me just get into AI without understanding the use case. That's the first advice. The second advice, if people are choosing where to focus, they could use my framework or other frameworks. There will be industries that will be adopting it faster because of the reasons that I mentioned, and some industries that will take time. That's true for, we have industries that are still adopting technology much slower than other industries. So that's to me the two basically pieces of advice. One, much more focus on use case, understanding the use case and how AI can help. And two, if you want to choose use use cases that you believe will have much more adoption of AI at a short to medium scale.
This is awesome. I think it's what that phrase, don't have a solution in search of a problem. So focus on getting a deep understanding of the problem, then falling in love with the solution. Well, Barak, thank you so much today for spending your valuable time sharing your knowledge and wisdom with our community. We're really, really honored to have you here today. And for those who join us, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter, which will send out recaps for key takeaways from today's event and also future event updates. So looking forward to see many of you reading our newsletter and joining our next show. And thanks again, Barak, for joining us. Really honored to have you.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed this discussion.
All right. Thank you.